Now that Gojo vs Sukuna is over, it's pretty clear that if Sukuna does have the 10 shadows, as it was said by Gojo, he is stronger. Though what's not as clear is, could Gojo actually beat Sukuna if he was in the Heian Era or if he was in Yuji's body? And I know you might be thinking, isn't it obvious? Gojo said Sukuna was stronger many times and he said it's likely that Sukuna would win. Well, if you just saw the leaks, yes, but the actual translation from Viz and TCB, it's actually more ambiguous than you'd think, and it really could be closer than a lot of people believe. And that's what I'll be talking about today. So hey, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and of course, be sure to check out the guest on this video, Six. He makes a ton of videos on anime like Naruto and Dragon Ball Z, but also in particular, he makes videos on JJK. So if you're a fan of JJK, trust me, you're gonna love his channel. Check it out, it's in the description. And of course, thanks to special members of the channel. Alright, let's actually get into this. So there's two actual versions of Sukuna we're gonna be talking about. Like I said in the intro, Heian Era Sukuna or Yuji Sukuna, because both of them could go very differently. I guess the first one I'll actually start with is, what if he had actually fought, let's say hypothetically, he did actually manage to take over Yuji's body, he got all of his fingers, so he got the 19, ate the Shinbutsu Mami, became 20, and then took the bath. Would this version of Sukuna actually be able to beat Gojo? Would the fight go any differently? And to start things off, I'll just pass off to Six.
One of the big things about Yuji Sukuna versus Megumi Sukuna was the gigantic difference in physicals between Megumi and Yuji, where Yuji is around grade 1 level, even without cursed energy. He's fighting sorcerers like Higuruma, who Higuruma is just stated to be around the level of a grade 1 sorcerer. And that's potentially even before he entered the Culling Games, he was around that level, so maybe he went even higher or deeper into the grade 1 level around that time. So with the difference in physicals being so much, people are like, okay, well, Sukuna's possibly just way stronger in Yuji's body. I tend to lean more towards it's not really that much of a factor, especially considering Sukuna's large cursed energy output, cursed energy amount. So if I was to put numbers on this, say that Yuji's around 10 times stronger than Megumi physically, just random numbers. Say Megumi's a 5, Yuji's a 50, and then just say Sukuna's a 500. Then obviously Megumi Sukuna would be a 505, Yuji Sukuna would be a 550. That's not that big of a difference, even though there is a difference there. So it would definitely make a difference to physicals. It's just how much of a difference is the really big thing here. I guess there's no real way to know or quantify that. We just know that whenever they were fighting, Gojo was pretty much beating up Megumi Sukuna. Hopefully, you know, if he does take the bath in Yuji's body and all of that, it would maybe give him a better chance when fighting against Gojo. Maybe he wouldn't have to use domain amplification in order to compete with him in hand-to-hand combat. Maybe the domain battles would go a bit differently because his body would be more durable, so Gojo couldn't actually destroy his body in the time it would take for him to destroy his domain. I'm leaning more towards that, like just the difference in physicals would be enough. When you put that immense amount of cursed energy on a body that gets soaked in even more cursed energy because he's taken the bath, I mean, I think that even if it doesn't make a world of a difference, it would make enough to where he can at least compete with Gojo.
And yeah, then it also comes into question of, would he actually get the power-up that Yuji got, right? Because it's debatable if the power-up came from all the cursed energy they got from Sukuna. So if it's just that, then no, he wouldn't get that massive amp that Yuji got. But if it does happen to be the case that Yuji's power-up comes from him being from the Heian Era, maybe he's also a reincarnation or something completely separate from Sukuna and being a vessel of Sukuna, then potentially he might get that, but I think that's too ambiguous and vague to actually give that to him. And yeah, also being in Megumi's body, I hate to say this, I mean, Yuji does have a lot of potential, but the big reason that Gojo actually thinks Yuji has a ton of potential is because he actually believes that Yuji will have Sukuna's techniques ingrained onto him, and this is something he said all the way back in, I believe, chapter 11. Megumi is someone who has the 10 shadows, just innately he has more potential. At least that's what we're assuming, because we don't exactly know how Kenjaku created Yuji, and maybe Yuji does have some secret potentials we don't know about. And I guess the biggest factor would be is Sukuna's going to fight differently, because now he doesn't have the whole, I'm gonna make Mahoraga actually find an adaptation for me that I could use and then use that to just one-shot you Gojo. Because that's the mindset that Sukuna has when he starts the fight. That's what he was going for the whole time. At least that's what it looks like, but if he doesn't have Mahoraga now, maybe he'd actually fight differently. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he really would just try to out-domain Gojo and just try to win like he was originally. It really could go either way, but I do think that the transformation that Sukuna does have, where he can reincarnate, or at least fully reincarnate or fully incarnate into his true form, I truly believe that that is going to be a big factor. And before we explain why, I'll at least bring up that it's not clear exactly what it means that it's going to restore Sukuna's body. Does this mean that it's just going to fully heal his wounds and just change his body but not his brain? Because if that's the case, then Sukuna still has all of the brain damage that he took from healing his curse technique the other 2 or 3 times that he had in the past during the fight. Or would it actually give him his Heian Era brain, or I guess his brain from the past, or his true body brain, which should be better than the human brain that Megumi has, because it was said that the brains of curses and humans actually all function differently, and we know that Sukuna is an ascended human. He's not a curse or a human. He seems to be a sort of mixture of both, though funny enough, he has been called a curse on many occasions and also a human in the past as well. But regardless of if it would even heal that specific specific part of the brain that not even reverse curse technique that can heal, and the part of the brain that controls domain expansions, it might not even matter if it does or it doesn't.
So if we assume that Sukuna at some point in this fight could reincarnate into his old form and get this stuff back, at what point would it actually be advantageous for him to do that? I think, and we talked about this a little bit before recording, I think that it's either after the 4th clash or during the 5th clash, which is when he inevitably ended up like actually taking the unlimited void. So if he does it during the 5th clash, then he can potentially keep his domain up for the full 3 minutes instead of it collapsing after 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Because the main reason it did that, at least according to the series, is that Sukuna, his curse technique lagged whenever he was healing his face and then his brain as well to actually get it back. So if he doesn't take unlimited void, or if he takes unlimited void for that 1 second, it's probably better for him to, instead of just standing there, reincarnate fully in order to actually keep his domain up the entire time, or potentially even longer, since it would heal the damage that Gojo had done to him previously. Because as soon as they got into the domain, Gojo had punched him in the chest. So if he can heal that up, then he's probably going to be able to keep his domain up the entire time. And at that point, Gojo's domain collapses and, you know, he's out of there. Because Sukuna doesn't lose his domain because he never takes unlimited void for the like less than 10 seconds or whatever. Unless you think that when it says Sukuna took unlimited void for less than 10 seconds, it's talking about when he got hit by it for 0.1 seconds. And that's what gave him all the brain damage. I don't really think that's the case, but I think it's more so talking about when he was actually just standing there and Gojo was like, oh, I'm gonna go crush his liver. That would be like how he would win if he were to reincarnate during the 5th clash. Outside of that, it would be between the 4th and 5th clash, I think would be the other time he would use it, where that's the clash where he actually lagged behind. So rather than healing his face and then doing the domain expansion, which he had to do because he couldn't keep the domain up with that damage on, he could just reincarnate and then do the domain expansion. An issue arises there because Gojo could also just open his domain before he gets the reincarnation off fully, and we don't really know how he does it yet, because at the time we're recording this, 237 is out, but the only thing that's out for it is the leaks. Maybe the official translation will say something else, maybe give us a bit more insight, but I don't think that's the case either. So we're probably not going to get more information on it until 238. But if Sukuna can't do anything while he's actually reincarnating, then it's probably not in his best interest to reincarnate in between those clashes, and it's probably in his best interest to just do it during the 5th clash.
So yeah, if that's the case, then Sukuna just wins, because like Six actually said, Gojo can't cast the domain. Sukuna would just do as he said, trap Gojo in his barrier and just end him right there. Though it would really just depend, again, how fast does he transform? You know, like Six said, would Gojo actually trap him or activate a domain while Sukuna's mid-transformation? It does seem like when Sukuna transformed, at least so far on the leaks, that Kashima actually fires off his guaranteed hit, Lightning Strike, which is a pretty lethal and strong blast, as it can even rip through someone who's immortal completely. As the blast hits, either two things happen. Either A, the blast hits and then Sukuna transforms and he heals from it, or B, it hits as he's transforming and the damage is just negated. But in either case, it does at least take a couple seconds from the looks of it for Sukuna to transform. And if he's smart enough to recognize after the 4th domain clash, because after the 3rd and 4th one he takes heavy damage, he would have to either during the 4th one, or as Six said, after the 4th one, transform right after it. I do agree that at that point, yeah, Gojo would just unfortunately probably lose to Yuji Sukuna, which is pretty crazy to say since that was the whole point of Yuji said, when I take this kid's body, you'll be the first I kill. Maybe that really was something he could do, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe Gojo really would have just locked him into the domain. That's actually for you to decide which interpretation you think is true. Alright, and now for the second part of the video. Could Gojo actually beat Sukuna if he was in the Heian era? Now, however you want this battle to go down, so maybe Sukuna teleports or travels through time to end up in the modern day, or maybe Gojo somehow travels through time and ends up in the past. Whatever setting you want to go with, you can go with it. But this is going to be pretty much a Sukuna who's got his Heian body and does have his original tools, so this does include the Trishula, which is Shiva's weapon, and it's pretty powerful actually. Could that version of Sukuna actually beat Gojo? And I'm gonna be honest, I actually think this one can't. As we discussed before, a big factor of Sukuna winning was actually the transformation. It is a pretty OP just trick to have up your sleeve, especially during a fight that just fully heals you, even if it's not that specific part of the brain that controls the domain expansion and all that. Having that is a big factor, but if Sukuna's already in his Heian body, or if he was already reincarnated, let's say in Yuji's body, it might actually just go, Gojo hits the unlimited void in the 5th one and he just dies. And I know the Trishula is actually very powerful, but more likely than not, it probably won't have anything that can bypass the limitless.
So when it comes to Gojo versus Heian Era Sukuna, at least in terms of a domain clash, I think that the last 3 clashes are a better representation of how this would probably go down if Sukuna doesn't have Maharaga. So Gojo was under the impression before that Sukuna just was kind of holding back on him because he wasn't using Maharaga or any of the 10 shadows when he was inside the domain. domain and was only using domain amplification, which that would have been the case. That would have been true. However, the reason Sukuna wasn't doing it is because he actually couldn't do it while also having Megumi use the move. Obviously, Heian Era Sukuna doesn't have this option whatsoever, so that would be voided and he would be reduced to eventually having to just use domain amplification inside of the barrier until it can destroy Gojo's barrier from the outside. Now, the only clash here that should be different would be the second clash, because Gojo says that Sukuna didn't take the easier route of just destroying the barrier from the inside whenever he flipped the condition. We know that the reason he probably did this was to give Mahoraga extra time to adapt, so what he did do instead was negate his sure hit inside, keep contact with Gojo, and that boosted the power outside through a binding valve, as well as him shortening the range or whatever. So Gojo would lose the first clash, then he would lose the second clash, and then third clash, whenever he made his domain very small, that's when he would start to pick things back up, and it would pretty much go the exact same way it did whenever they started doing the clashes originally. Except at the end of it this time, whenever he does get Sukuna in Unlimited Void, Sukuna has no way out, or at least no way out that we know of. I mean, potentially he could make like a binding vow or something, I don't know. Sukuna likes to abuse the power system, but from what we know of, Sukuna shouldn't be able to get out after those last three clashes. He'll be reduced to using domain amplification within the last three, and Gojo will win.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. If Sukuna truly did have something that could bypass the Limitless or Infinity from the beginning, I mean, maybe he really does, and he just decided not to use it. The best argument that I could think of and that I've heard is that he doesn't want to show the rest of the students Shrine because he doesn't want them to find a way to counter it or just have a trick up his sleeve. Now, you see, that was actually a great argument while Sukuna was weakened, because the students would jump a weakened Sukuna, and it'd be better to have Shrine as an unknown ace against them. However, now that we actually saw Sukuna has a transformation that completely restores his body, even if it's not his domain, which it could be as long as it restores all of his wounds, I really don't care how many of these students jump him. It doesn't matter if they know Shrine or not. Sukuna's washing them all. It's just over for them. So that's actually why I think it's more likely now than it actually was before, now that we've seen Sukuna does have a transformation and he wasn't worried about the students. Even though that's what Kusakabe and everyone theorized, we've seen that Kusakabe and Meme can be very wrong. He's actually wrong 3 times during the battle, but most importantly when the chapter ends at 235 and he says that Gojo is won, and the next page one shot off screen. So yeah, not everything that he says is that reliable. So that's just why I truly think that Shrine, it just doesn't have anything that could bypass the Limitless. But if it does, that does change this argument though. And another thing I actually want to bring up is the fact that maybe, let's say he was going to use Shrine from the beginning and he does actually have to fight differently because he doesn't have Mahoraga and the 10 Shadows, because he's not going to rely on Mahoraga making an adaptation, so he now has to rely on different techniques or different strategies to actually kill Gojo. Now that he needs another way to actually kill Gojo, an argument that I actually thought of and other people actually thought of is, in this situation, would he actually just pull out Shrine right after the first domain clash, or even after the second one? Because in both these instances, Gojo doesn't have the Limitless or the Infinity to protect him, so maybe he could just pull out the Fire Arrow and just one-shot Gojo right then and there, or whatever else Shrine has. And there's actually 2 reasons why he might not be able to do this right away. The first one being is that Cleaviness Mantle, I truly think that it's the most lethal curse technique that he has. Now, yes, the flames are clearly far more destructive, they have way more AoE, and it honestly looks like a nuke, but Cleaviness Mantle, it is a condensed slash that is made to try and pierce its target. If a full guaranteed hit of hundreds or thousands, you know, how many slashes you think that Gojo actually took at the end of the first 2 domain clashes, if those can't cut through Gojo and they're spawning on him, I don't think anything Shrine has would have actually passed through his durability anyway if he can tank something that lethal. Obviously excluding the space-time reality or just completely busted existence cutting slash. That's completely different. And the other reasons actually has to do with, could Sukuna even switch out the Cleaviness Mantle after those domain clashes that he had won?
So this part is gonna naturally come with a little bit of curse technique theorizing for Sukuna anyway, because so far in the fan book we know that the Fire Arrow is at least a part of Sukuna's Shrine technique, because the fan book does say that Sukuna has shown that his curse technique has 2 sides to it. So the black box and whatever Sukuna pulls out of it is at least part of his technique. Kusakabe says in chapter 230 that the brain is like a black box system when it comes to curse techniques, and I like that wording specifically. It's a little bit like, I think, GEGE throwing something at us, like throwing us a bone and giving us a hint at what Sukuna's curse technique actually is. So if you know about Shrine, you know that Shrine is supposed to be more translated to cabinet, at least something to store things in. I think Sukuna's curse technique is the ability to open the black box in his brain and store more curse techniques in it. Obviously not just any old curse techniques, and I'll get on to the limitations of that in a minute, so don't start, you know, commenting, getting mad at me or whatever. So it is stated as well that curses brains work differently to humans and human sorcerers. So I think when Sukuna opens the black box and tells Jogo that, you don't know about this, or I guess a cursed spirit wouldn't, is because cursed spirits don't have that same black box things like humans do whenever it comes to curse techniques. A natural counter to this would be that Yuki says you can't just have a bunch of curse techniques in your brain because you'll eventually fry it. You have to have like some sort of external storage like Yuta and Rika. So we know that Kenjaku has bare minimum 3 curse techniques in his brain at any given time. So it's possible that Sukuna only has that many locked up there. Like he's got Cleave and Dismantle, he's got the Fire Arrow, and then one more. That's possible. It's also possible that Sukuna can only store very simple curse techniques in his brain to where the point it doesn't overload it. So we know that Sukuna was able to use Max Elephant's water extremely well against Gojo. So maybe there's a water technique in there or something like that. He's used it before. We know that he was able to use 10 shadows. So he at least had Fire Arrow, Cleave and Dismantle, and 10 shadows at one time. And like I said, maybe he has more beyond that. We don't really know. So why this is important is essentially Kenjaku establishes to us that you can't really use 2 curse techniques at a time. He uses the gravity technique, then in between there he uses curse spirit manipulation, then he'll use the gravity technique again. So you can't really use 2 curse techniques at the same time, or 2 aspects of it, right? So if Sukuna's curse technique is to just store curse techniques, then the reason he wouldn't use the Fire Arrow is because he's using Cleave and Dismantle at that time. Either that, or the only way Sukuna knows how to realize his domain is to use Cleave and Dismantle, and he can't imbue the other techniques into his Surehead. Now, we do know that Sukuna, once his Cleave and Dismantle gets burned out, he can use the Fire Arrow because he did that on Maharaga. But that's up to if you think his domain was actually, gone by that time, which I guess we don't really know. But yeah, the reason he can't use the Fire Arrow on Gojo is likely because he can only use 1 curse technique at a time.
One other possibility is maybe if it is a storage like Six says, and it may just be because in Gege's old manga, the MC of that manga, which is called Number 9, he has an ability which is straight up Shrine. It's the exact same kanji, even with the exact same little 2 lines on it, and his ability is actually a storage of weapons. So very likely, yes, just like Six said, it might just be a storage of cursed techniques, or I guess like cursed weapons like a Fire Arrow, right? It might be possible that just like how Yuta had cursed technique burnout, because he couldn't use his copy, he could still use his other technique, which is Rika, because Yuta has 2 cursed techniques. He has copy and then he has Rika, which are both said by the narrator to both be cursed techniques, and it's even said in the data books as well. And it's said by Ryu in the narrator that Yuta's cursed technique copy is burnt out and he can't use it, but he was still using the full manifestation of Rika at the time while he's fighting Ryu. So maybe Sukuna could actually pull out the Fire Arrow if it's another cursed technique in a storage while the techniques burn out, but even then, it probably doesn't matter too much, because I just don't think it's going to be something that's going to be able to kill Gojo in one shot, because if you can't just take his head off or instantly kill him, like Sukuna did with his space Mahoraga slash that he did at the end of the fight, Gojo's just going to heal because he has the 6 eyes, and he can just spam his reverse curse technique limitlessly. At least he could before he had the brain damage. But the last thing I'll say to back up Six's point, it's a pretty strong argument, is that it's said that the curse technique is a black box, and obviously when Sukuna says Shrine, it is a black box, right? That's what we see. If the curse technique burnout is just the black box, which, is turned off for a while, and Gojo actually needs to destroy that part of his brain and heal it, which is pretty much like overheating an engine, it might not matter if Cleave and Dismantle is actually a part of Shrine, because the black box is burnt out, he won't be able to use the flames either, because the part of his brain that actually constitutes curse technique and where Sukuna is actually storing curse techniques, Shrine itself, that is actually burnt out. And if he could switch with it, I just don't think it's going to matter, unless he really has something absolutely insane that is super lethal and stronger than Cleave and Dismantle itself that we'll see in the Kashimo fight. But then you got to question, if he really does have something like that, and if he really could just switch it out whenever he wanted to, why didn't he just one-shot and end Gojo right after the first domain clash? I think if he did, he probably would have done it already. And now for the closing parts, I guess it's just some narrative points, which I know people are definitely going to bring up in the comments. If you were someone who just saw the initial leaks, or just read what Miyamura said and never actually read TCB or Viz, which is unfortunately a decent amount of people that just end up going with what Miyamura said like fact, because there's actually still a lot of translations that Miyamura said from previous chapters that people still quote as fact, you might just think it's over because Gojo absolutely glazes Sukuna to high heaven in the leaks, calling him stronger multiple times, which granted he was, but especially with the time when Gojo says he would have beaten me even if he didn't have the 10 shadows, it is very different in the TCB and Viz, but especially the Viz, since in particular for this chapter we don't have the usual translator, no disrespect, but he does make a lot of errors. We actually have Lightning, one of the most respected and trusted translators in the community. He translated this chapter for Viz, and Gojo actually says with his translation, I'm not sure if I could have beaten him even if he didn't have Megumi's 10 shadows. I think this is just so much more ambiguous, because we even said earlier on, he says Sukuna didn't even and go all out. Clearly Gojo just doesn't know what he has, and he's just saying probably he might just have something that could have been me. It's just an assumption from Gojo, and it does sound a lot more theoretical, at least in the Viz translation, where he's saying, yeah, probably this guy is very powerful, he probably would have been me. But it's definitely a lot more vague, as Gojo himself doesn't know. He knows as much as we do, which is actually nothing about Sukuna's true curse technique. He's just theorizing.
Yeah, Gojo also just randomly got cut in half. Like he was winning, and then he just got cut in half. It's reasonable to assume whenever you're winning and then the guy who you just crippled cuts you in half that maybe he wasn't going all out.
Yeah, it's pretty rough for Gojo after just getting off-screen one-shot. I can't lie, that was a pretty crazy decision. But hey, if you did enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like and of course subscribe for more JJK content, and check out Six's channel if you haven't already. Trust me, this guy has a ton of great content on a variety of anime, and in particular his JJK content, it's really good. He has some really great analysis, as you heard, and if you're watching this video, you're probably a JJK fan, so check him out. And of course, thanks to all the channel members as well, it's much appreciated. But that's all for the video. Take care, guys.